Hate all the blather and want to get down with the nitty-gritty preparation committee? Go to eatsempire.com/recipes for all the details without all the hot air. Welcome, loyal and hungry denizens of the Eats Empire, to another Master Baking podcast. Bread machines are the most underutilized and misunderstood kitchen appliance in existence. They are more often than not given to a couple as a wedding gift, at most used once, and then put aside for a year before being donated to a thrift store to make room for the gift they receive on their first anniversary, a George Foreman grill, which is the second most underutilized and misunderstood kitchen appliance in existence. There's one undeniable fact. Nearly every human who can tolerate gluten loves fresh baked bread with their meal. It's not an acquired taste. The smell is intoxicating. The taste of warm rolls slathered in butter fresh from the oven is rivaled only by a fresh-baked homemade pizza. As I've mentioned before, I'm no master baker, but I can make perfect bread and pizza dough with a bread machine. I'll be using a Breadman TR-440 for this demonstration. There are many different companies that have manufactured similar, efficient, block-toed kitchen robots like these. Toastmaster, Oster, Panasonic, Cuisinart, to name a few. They basically look like a countertop trash can with a small LED panel. They're durable behemoths that rarely break down. They can be had for under $10 at nearly any Goodwill. I know that if I spent the day going from Goodwill to Goodwill, I could easily buy over 100 of these devices, and I'd have a block-toed robot army of bakers to satisfy most of my master baking needs. If you decide to buy a used one, make sure the loaf pan isn't horribly scratched and that it has the paddle that fits in the middle of the loaf pan. When you're at a thrift store, plug it in. Many bread machines make a beep when plugged in. Make sure the LED screen is lit. You should also hit the start button to make sure that the dough cycle starts. You should see the paddle make a few short starts and stops. That's normal, and almost without exception, that means you have a good bread machine. Another thing to check is to make sure the bottom has all 4 rubber feet. If it doesn't, your bread machine will try to run away during the mixing and kneading cycle. One thing that scares off many people from buying a bread maker is their size. Even the small units take up quite a bit of counter space. I don't leave mine on the counter. I store it on a shelf in my garage. Also, what's great about a bread maker is that you can plug them in anywhere. There are self-contained bakeries that can do their job wherever you have an outlet. Dining room table, outside on the patio, wherever you have space. It doesn't have to take up valuable kitchen countertop prep areas. Let's discuss ingredients. The most important ingredient is the type of flour used. If you're making pizza dough, you can get away with whatever cheap all-purpose flour you choose. If you're baking a loaf of bread in your bread maker and you don't want it to turn out like a dense brick, you'll need to use a good quality bread flour. I like King Arthur unbleached bread flour, but you'll also get great results from Gold Medal, Red Mill, or any number of other bread flour purveyors. What's bread flour? It's milled from hard spring wheat and has a higher gluten content. The protein from the gluten adds a durability to the dough that allows it to rise higher, thus avoiding the brick effect. For this demonstration, we're making the dough in the bread maker, but we'll be making the dinner rolls in the oven. So if you only have all-purpose or self-rising flour, don't worry, that'll work just fine. But next time you're shopping, pick up some bread flour and you'll see the difference between making dinner rolls with all-purpose flour and bread flour. The rest of the ingredients' quality don't really matter so much. For baking powder, I'll be using Clabber Girl, mostly because she's got such an enticing clabber. You can use cheap vegetable oil or expensive olive oil, but you won't notice any difference in the final product. You'll want to use bottled water or filtered water. Tap water has varying amounts of chlorine, and it can adversely affect how the yeast makes your dough rise. You can use honey or sugar, doesn't matter. Many bread maker recipes insist that you use bread machine yeast. Feel free if you like, but I buy a 1-pound bag of Red Star Active Dry Yeast on eBay for $12, and it does a great job, and it's enough yeast to make over 1,200 dinner rolls. I'm going to be calling out ingredients for a 2-pound loaf, which will make 12 jumbo dinner rolls. If you go to eatsempire.com/recipes and click on Master Baker, you'll find links to the measurements for the medium-sized and the jumbo dinner rolls. I list the measurements by volume and weight in both metric and whatever system you call what we use here in the US. I prefer to weigh my ingredients as I find it is much more accurate unless it's tiny amounts, in which case I use measuring spoons. If you're listening to an audio-only version of this podcast, go to eatsempire.com/podcasts to watch the video version to see the difference between the medium-sized and the jumbo-sized dinner rolls. First step, remove the paddle off the center post of your bread pan. Then either spray the center post with cooking spray or use a paper towel soaked in vegetable oil to coat it. Then replace the paddle over the post and liberally spray or wipe oil coating the paddle and the inside of the pan. I find it's better to add the ingredients with a pan outside your bread maker, as it's easy to accidentally slop flour and other ingredients inside the baking chamber. It won't hurt it, but you'll have to clean it up eventually. Make sure you add the ingredients in this order. Basically, it's liquids, then solids, then yeast. I like to pre-mix my liquids before adding them to the pan. Measure 1.5 cups of room temperature water. Add 3 tablespoons of oil. Use the same tablespoon without cleaning out the oil to measure your 3 tablespoons of honey. That oily tablespoon keeps your honey from sticking to your spoon measure. Make sure to give your liquids a good stir to dissolve the honey. As you can see, I didn't stir it enough as some of the honey is stuck to the bottom of the measuring cup. Next, add 4 cups of bread flour, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, 3 tablespoons of dry milk powder, and 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Then make a small indentation in the center of the flour and add 1.5 teaspoons of yeast. Now that all your ingredients are in your pan, carefully lift the pan and insert it in the baking chamber. Select the dough setting and hit start. About 15 minutes before the dough cycle is completed, preheat your oven to its lowest setting. On mine, it's 170. After it's preheated, turn it off. You want it to cool down a little bit. When the dough setting cycle is completed, remove the dough onto your countertop. Next, divide the dough into quarters. Then divide each quarter into 3 pieces, which will give you 12 pieces of dough. I like using my iron skillet for baking the rolls, but you can use a cookie sheet or a muffin tray if you'd like. When using my iron skillet, I place 3 pieces of dough in the center of the pan and then encircle those 3 pieces with the other 9 pieces. Now we're going to proof the dough. Place your pan into your slightly warm oven and allow the dough to rise for 30 minutes. Then remove the pan and set it aside. Now preheat your oven to 400 degrees. Once the oven is preheated, add your pan to the center rack and bake for 12 minutes. After 12 minutes, your rolls should be a perfect golden brown. Remove from the oven and let cool for at least 20 minutes before serving. As I mentioned earlier, I used the TR-440 model by Breadman for this demo. Like all bread makers, it does a great job making dough, but like many bread makers, it's not so great at baking a loaf of bread. When I don't feel like firing up the oven and I want to make a loaf of bread, I use my Sunbeam 5891. Go to eatsempire.com/podcasts and check out my podcast on how to make the perfect loaf of bread with a Sunbeam 5891.